What up, meatheads? This is Travis, and this is the Meat Block Podcast. In this episode, Ryan had the amazing opportunity to interview Adam Danforth. And if you don't know who Adam is, he is a writer, he's a butcher, and I like to call him an educator. A good friend of mine recently did a 2-year stint in a for-profit prison for circumstances that were completely within his control. But I was allowed to write to him, and I was also allowed to buy him books from Amazon direct. Before he found himself living in this new, amazing studio apartment, he was a butcher, a slaughterman, to be exact. We would talk on the phone using global tel-link, and he would tell me what he wanted to do with his life once he found freedom. Him discovering he had nothing but time, he sent me a list of books that he would like for me to purchase for him. There were books on men's health, paleo, hazard analysis, critical control point, and 2 of Adam Danforth's books. It's amazing what people could accomplish when they put their mind to it, especially in unique situations. While my friend was living in this controlled environment, he found himself working in the kitchen and cutting meat. He had to get all the proper certificates, it being a kitchen serving the public, even if that public is inmates, not allowed to go out to the public. Upon his release in January of last year, hustled and found himself with a QT position at a major USDA processing facility working the 3rd shift. This is a great job for anyone. It is a remarkable job for someone who has been to prison. In reflection, I asked him what prepared him for this new position, besides his previous work experience. He said, reading Adam's books over and over again, along with his existing knowledge, then using that and applying it once he got out. Here's Adam Danforth being interviewed by Ryan O'Hearn.
Good cutting enhances the quality of good meat. In his way, the meat cutter is an artist. Poor cutting results in an inferior piece of meat, regardless of quality.
He's the author of 2 remarkable books on slaughtery and butchery, and the recipient of a James Beard Award, which is a high culinary honor in recognition of his work. The books are 2 volumes. There's Butchering Beef with the subtitle, The Comprehensive Photographic Guide to Humane Slaughtering and Butchering. The next is Butchering Poultry, Rabbit, Lamb, Goat, and Pork with the same subtitle. They're available for purchase in hardcover or softcover from Adam's website and also on Amazon. Though Adam has achieved international notoriety, he did not grow up in a butcher shop from a young age. Rather, he chose meat and butchery later in life.
When I first got into meat, and looking at where I wanted to focus my interest in food, I chose meat because it felt to me like it was the most complicated component of food in general. And I felt like it was so vast that I would never get bored. I think that anything is so vast that once you really begin to delve into it, you probably wouldn't get bored, whether it's food or anything else. Right. I mean, not to say you can't delve so far into vegetables that you never get bored. But for me, I just felt like meat was so complicated that it would continue to hold my interest, and it certainly has and more.
Adam set out to learn butchery and slaughter and found an American landscape deficient in mentors.
When you don't have access to mentors and lineage, you have to figure some things out. And so, my approach to figuring things out, it emulates just sort of the way that I tend to think about things and analyze things.
I'm sorry about the audio here. Adam sounds like Guy Diamond from the movie Trolls in this audio, and it is my fault for being a crappy novice podcaster. I apologize. I can promise you in real life he does not have a robot voice.
And I didn't have a perspective on right and wrong. I didn't have the compass that governed all my decisions based upon some prerequisite knowledge that was handed to me through, or that I earned through an apprenticeship or through other sort of models. So I didn't have this understanding that this is the way we're supposed to do it, or this is not the way. I was sort of like, I want to fit a way that seems like the right way. In many regards, ended up not reinventing the wheel for myself, but like that's not the most efficient way to go about learning anything.
Needless to say, Adam did learn the craft, and he learned it well. And though not having a mentor felt like a disadvantage, it was also advantageous because it allowed him to discover the meat world on his own terms, develop an authentic and very personal relationship with the material. Though he succeeded in becoming a skilled, hireable butcher, the story of the disappearance of the American neighborhood butcher shop and the subsequent lack of teachers left a strong impression on him.
That breakdown of butcher shops all over America really has happened everywhere. So having access to mentors is unbelievable. And you're one of the few people who really has access to real mentors in the way that butchery has always viewed them. It doesn't mean that new styles of mentors, but other people who are leading a new generation of butchers can also step up to that role and educate people.
Adam, how did the fact that you were mostly self-taught affect your perception of yourself, or your perception of your work within this industry?
I'm a very unorthodox individual within the butchery profession for many reasons. And for a long time, that gave me it fueled a lot of insecurities and ended up creating a very strong sort of imposter syndrome within my space within the butchery community and within the craft. And it took a number of experiences of me working with people who were vastly more experienced than I was, and groups of people who had cumulative experience that far exceeded my own, and that my work with those people and workshops that I did with them and hands-on training I did with those people, they were positively received, but also, to my surprise, and somewhat to their surprise, they had never considered meat in the way that I was talking about meat. And there were some instances where I really realized that if groups of people like this, of chefs and butchers and processors who have far more experience than I do, are not thinking about meat in this way, which to me is the future of how to think about meat in a more complete vision of how ideas of quality start on farms and continue all the way to a plate, and how to maintain those things, and how we can promote more flavor within animals that are alive, and how we have more responses to emotions when it comes to flavor than texture, and all these other ways to think about things like that I really realized that, one, if these sort of people didn't think that way about meat, then most people don't. And at the same time, it gave me some insight into something that I'd never really considered, which was that so often shifts within an industry, especially one that has had continuations of knowledge for many generations, the shifts that occur within that industry often are instigated by folks who are outside of the paradigm. And I'm certainly outside the normal paradigm because I had to go at it in many ways by myself. And I've been fortunate to be able to work with some people at certain points in my career, and they've certainly influenced how I cut as well. And every time I do workshops or I work with other people, I try to draw as much knowledge from them as I try to provide, because we're all constantly still learning, and there is so much to learn about this topic. When I do workshops, I still end up having these feelings of self-doubt, and it's important to recognize that we can still have those sort of thoughts and recognize that they don't necessarily define who we are, and they're not as paralyzing to me anymore.
Adam reminds us that it is often the outsiders that are able to connect the dots and inspire great positive change within an established field. It's the unorthodox individuals that breathe new perspective and new life and set the stage for a new movement. But it's not from a shunning or devaluing of the old perspectives that traction is made. It's with a spirit of collaboration and mutual upliftment. It's a well-known fact that it's challenging to be that person who goes against the grain. Butchers who have decades of experience in the trade or who come from a strong butchery region may criticize that individual who goes against conventional wisdom. Butchers who inherit many generations of handed-down butchering knowledge may look down upon those with less experience or those who bring to the table an unorthodox idea. Adam, have your books or your ideas or perspectives received any pushback from the butcher orthodoxy or from mainstream butchers?
Well, I think that in any profession, there is indoctrinated knowledge as to the right ways and wrong ways in order to succeed based upon a lot of valuable wisdom and experience. And there's no reason why we need to reinvent the wheel every time. And I think that it's really fortunate to work with any craft that have had the benefit of working under other people who have spent countless decades working within that craft and have passed down knowledge through generations. I've worked with plenty of people who when they first see me and show up to a butchery. I mean, I remember when I first did, one of the first workshops I ever did was in Asheville, North Carolina, and it was a Mother Earth News Fair, and it was butchering sheep, and it was a super hot day, and there was a crowd that was filled mostly with homesteaders and really a lot of farmers and a lot of people in camo, and I think I was in like pink shorts and a teal tank top or something, and I got on stage to butcher these sheep, and I'm sure I walked on stage and people were sort of like, who is this dude who's on stage right now? By the end of it, I would like to think that I had garnered some of the respect of the people there, at least the ones who were lined up to ask me questions afterwards and who chose to purchase books and have me sign them and things like that. And I think that that's a perception a lot of the time, is that, one, I don't look like your normal butcher, and neither do a lot of people who are entering into butchering these days. There's a lot of women who are entering into it, and there's a lot of people of various different backgrounds. What I see consistently is that there's also a lot of counterculture people entering into butchery that come from backgrounds that are incredibly diverse and don't really fit into any specific stereotype of how people may associate them. And to me, that's just incredibly powerful. And I think that there's this sort of like social outcast component to who's being attracted to doing something that's sort of fringe-like, which is whole animal butchery these days. And those people are used to being sort of rejected. So it's not something in which they are intimidated to get into it as much as maybe people who are used to falling into more normal formats of society. So, when I work with people who are really rigid about the way that they think about meat, and who have, who are potentially processors or butchers who have been doing it for, 4 times the amount that I've been doing it and have their own preconceived notions, I think there are inroads for how I speak in those situations in order to reach them in a way. And I've only, I think, gathered that sort of understanding through my own experience of traveling and having a lot of exposure to various different types of people and educational formats. We all have a different sort of language. And, when we talk to farmers or processors or butchers or chefs or consumers, like there's all this sort of vernacular that is very specific to those people, especially based upon, is it a nouveau style of butchering group, or is it, processors who, are 50 years old and have been doing it for a long time, or are these curmudgeonous farmers, or are these new farmers, or are these who knows? But I've learned over these years what the language is in order to hopefully try to disarm some of that closed-mindedness a little bit, because I think in the end, everybody wants to have a better understanding of the work that they do.
So, Adam, what's your approach? What's your mindset when you interact with butchers that may disagree with you or come from a different background?
If you approach it, I think with, what I'm sure you do, which is, with not a lot of ego and with an openness to receive as much as you want to share when the moments are right to share something. They have so much to teach. They've been around it for so long, and the industry has changed in so many ways, and they've survived, and there's so much to be said for that. Part of it is this sort of protectiveness of people in the industry that have been doing it for a long time, where it's been a struggle, and don't come in and tell me how to do things, because I've been in it through all the ups and downs over the last several decades. This newbie kid from around the block is going to come in and tell me, I totally get that.
Right.
And it's totally justified.
It is clear that people want to learn this butchery craft. People want to apprentice in this trade, but generally are confused about how to do so. Let me do a brief interlude here to give some context, some background. The meat cutter trade used to be a viable career through much of the first half of the 20th century in America. There were corner butcher shops in every community, in every neighborhood. The opportunities to learn this trade were plentiful. In the 1960s, trends were shifting toward industrial food production models and towards the mega grocery store. Neighborhood mom-and-pop grocers could not compete. Butcher lineage and knowledge in towns and cities faded, and the great de-skilling of the meat cutter workforce began. Decades later, renewed interest in food quality and craftsmanship spawned a revolution in the world of American cookery. Culinary schools filled to capacity, and cooking shows brought the celebrity chef into a position of strong social influence. Without having a strong local butcher culture to draw from, progressive chef minds tapped into whatever global butchering and meat wisdom they could find in an attempt to revitalize the American meat world. European cookery and cutting styles were rich with lineage and old world ideology, and many chefs drew upon these European traditions to infuse meaning into what had become a somewhat stale, overly industrial American meat world. The old world American chef butcher was born, and spinning off from this, the urban craft butchery movement was born. We've seen rock star butchers receive a great deal of media attention. We've seen consumers begin to vote with their dollar, begin to wake up to the injustices of industrial factory farming practices. We've seen the enthusiasm of trends towards local, seasonal, organic, and grass-fed. I ask Adam, what are some further shifts that you'd like to see take place in food culture and meat culture?
You're working in slaughtering and cutting, and it's a really hard environment. There's not enough respect given to those people who do those jobs. And I feel like that's one of the main areas that needs to shift in consumers and really the whole spectrum, looking at how do we maintain incredible quality meat from when the animal is alive to when it's on a plate. And in that process, we have farmers, processors, butchers, chefs, home cooks, and consumers. And farmers are getting the respect, and chefs are getting the respect, and the consumers think that they're always right. And butchers sort of, behind a counter sometimes are getting the respect, but like processors not only are not getting any respect, but we're not instilling them with a pride of craft that other people are finding in their work. And I think that that's part of what also needs to happen. And I think there are people obviously doing those jobs who take pride in it and do it really well. But from a public perspective and an outside perspective, I don't think people realize how hard the jobs are and how proficient you have to be, and how much really the processor is the linchpin for quality. Because in those moments of death and how that animal is handled, that's the moment when you make it or break it for how the animal was raised and where it's going to go after it's dead.
He does not dodge the subject of slaughtering and death. He digs into it.
The farmers that you see are potentially on bucolic land with happy animals. And then you see the chef and they're like, now I have the animal and it's in my kitchen and I'm going to show you how. And you're sort of like, okay, we're just going to gloss over the fact that like this animal was killed and somebody dealt with that and it had to be aged and it had to be this and that. And it's also part of how we push out of our psyche the conversation of death in our society. One of the things I learned so much about working in slaughtering, but also having children, was how much death became a part of our conversation in our house that it never would have been before, and how normalizing it became, because of course it's the only inevitability, and so when you open it up to be just a normal topic and you talk about it, because every day is life and death for people, especially on a farm, then your children begin to just have a better understanding of how to deal with it in the so many ways that they face in their life, whether it's not relatives or pets or whatever it might be. So I began to realize and think about how just death begins to inform other people in my slaughter workshops and in our conversations after slaughter workshops, and in the way that I get into conversations about people who choose not to eat meat for various ways. And so I think a lot of that lack of limelight is that people don't want to shine it on an area that they would prefer to keep hidden. And for me, one of the great achievements I felt like of receiving a Beard Award for my book was that the recognition from high above in the culinary industry was one of a book that didn't obfuscate any of the realities of how an animal is killed. And suddenly, in kitchens, you have a book that includes killing animals as an instructional manual on also how to process those animals in their kitchens, and they're using them. And it was, for me, one of the first recognitions of slaughtering really coming into more of a professional or cultural norm for talking about meat in a professional sense, and not just sort of like NAMP numbers and overnight ordering and things like that. It was sort of like, these animals do need to die, and they need to die with reverence and we need to have the respect and all that stuff. So, I think the things are shifting, but it'll be a long time before slaughtermen get the same limelight as the farmers and the chefs, but we can hopefully cause that shift to happen.
When I'm working on the kill truck and we're pulled up on a farm, the farmer or farmhand stays with us all day long, watching, tractoring guts to the compost pile, and moving the animals down the loading chute to get them into position for us. Some farmers will have their young children with them on their backs, playing off to the side or sleeping in a stroller nearby. I am so impressed with the perspective, the education that these farm children are getting. From the youngest of ages, they are seeing the truth of what it means to raise, kill, and process an animal for food.
There's nothing that a child thinks is disturbing until we tell them it's disturbing, pretty much. My daughter has been evidence of that. And, she's seen it all. And she knows how it works, and she knows how you can do it with reverence for this animal, and how you can care about these animals at the same time as understanding that they're going to sacrifice themselves for our sustenance. Or they don't have a choice really in the matter. We're going to sacrifice them for our sustenance. But those things can coexist. As my friend Camus, I think, said in her forthcoming book, there's some sort of quote which was, how can you love an animal but kill it? And it's sort of like, it's not but, it's and. You can love an animal and kill it. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive.
Americans as a culture have a difficult time dealing with and facing human death. I've worked in hospitals and hospice, and my wife still does work as a hospital nurse. As a society, we spend a great amount of energy and resources on the prolonging of human life without focusing enough on quality of life, and with very little ability or tools at our disposal to help us navigate difficult end-of-life scenarios and the realities of loss and grief. Outcropping from this, Americans have a difficult time with the subject of animal death and the killing of animals for food. With this complexity in place, still, Adam is passionate about continuing the work of educating consumers and fostering clearer paths for apprentice butchers.
One of the organizations that I'm involved in and on the board of is the Butcher's Manifesto. And, that the aim of that organization is really to be international network of meat professionals with a focus on finding these regions that still have generational knowledge there and working to preserve that knowledge and gather that wisdom, but then at the same time combine it with new views on anatomy and meat science and food safety to really create this future-looking vision of what the craft of butchery can be. And then with that understanding, also we need to provide access points for education, entry points for education, really, so that when people want to learn how to do this and they live in Europe or they live in South Africa or they live in South America or North America, we can point them in a direction where it's sort of like, this is a place where you can get an apprenticeship and they will take you on eventually. Maybe it's not open now, but you could spend 6 months or a year there, and then after that you'll have access to these other places in the network, and you can travel here and you can continue your education. I get contacted routinely for people who want apprenticeships, and I just don't really have the model to offer them. And I also don't have really anywhere I can point them to find that place. And there's no educational institution that's really teaching butchery certificate courses in a way that suits people who want to open or run butcher shops or things like that. And Fleischer's, had a great apprenticeship program. It was expensive, but it still offered a lot of people access to education that wasn't otherwise available. And when you look at the people who've opened up whole animal shops around America, many of them ended up passing through their doors. And so, they provided such a valuable service to really kickstarting this craft again in America. But we need to do more. And they've now shut down their apprenticeship program, so it's not operating anymore.
Fleischer's Craft Butchery offered a butchery apprenticeship program for many years that provided a viable inroad for novice butchers wanting to jumpstart their careers. Check out @Fleischers on Instagram, FLEISHERS, or check out Jason Yang's page @Criminal Defense Butcher.
We can't just have like one place in New York City where you have to like live in Brooklyn and pay to be an apprentice. Like that doesn't work for most people. So, the Butcher's Manifesto is really one of the things that I'm hopeful about being a part of, that will help broaden the opportunities for people who are incoming and also just knowledge sharing amongst people who are in it. I mean, for you and me and other people who are working in it, it's like, there's so much work and there's so much knowledge that we're still sort of contained within this regional way. And I've had the benefit of being able to travel and work with people in a lot of different situations, but still, it's like if you want to understand really the true way to make biltong, I mean, are you going to search for a recipe through Google, or are you going to contact Caroline in South Africa through the Butcher's Manifesto Network and be able to understand all the sort of regional variations of how that actually comes about authentically?
So you are imagining a bona fide global network through the Butcher's Manifesto that would allow butchers to share knowledge across regions, essentially professionals connecting with professionals across the globe.
I think that there's a way in which it can become this sort of open source educational model where we begin really sharing. I mean, I'm not a big believer in trade secrets. I want to be like totally open about everything all the time and help empower other people. I think that's the only way that we grow, individually, but also as an overall community.
Now, how would these entry points be set up for young butchers? How would a novice butcher access an apprenticeship using this model?
One of the many things that the Butcher's Manifesto wants to do is provide these educational opportunities for people, because that has to happen for the craft not to go through the same sort of dying situation that it's gone through in the last several decades. And so this resurgence that's occurring can't just be sort of like a blip in the history of butchery. It has to regain enough traction in order to continue to help people become butchers and pass down their own knowledge and, recreate it.
And what is an example of what might one of these entry points look like?
It could be, the entry point could be your operation. As long as we understand that there are apprenticeship opportunities and you're part of the commitment of the manifesto and the 5 principles that have to do with really recognizing the aspects of quality and education and joy and reverence and all these things that are important to maintaining the integrity of our craft, then become a part of the network and participate in it in a way that, if there are people within the Northwest or that want to learn not only just farm slaughtering, but production cutting and on-farm slaughtering and HACCP and USDA mobile laws. And, there's so much to learn. But most people don't understand that a lot of these things even exist. And then on top of it, a lot of people, there's very few positions, and a lot of people don't open them up to people unless they understand their commitment to begin with.
I know the Butcher's Manifesto is a young organization. Can you describe to us what work has been done so far with the Butcher's Manifesto?
It's in its infancy. We've had 2 gatherings in Copenhagen, and this last one was our biggest gathering, but it's a very curated group of people who are there. And really what we're trying to do is try to find the key influencers in various different regions around the world that can then begin to set up more localized chapters of the manifesto that can begin, influencing their own locale. As a worldwide network, change happens on the ground. So I think the greatest thing that we can do is provide infrastructure and also help people with setting up localized chapters and bringing people in locally. And once you're inside the network, then you have opportunities to travel within it. And if you're in Europe, Hendrik Dierendonk has an incredible operation in Belgium, and then you can go to Amsterdam and learn curing there, and then you can go to Copenhagen or Germany or Switzerland or France. There are people in all of these countries who are operating great places. Many people just don't know how to get to them or that they exist, and the people who are running them don't understand the demand for apprenticeship. So it's all of these things coming together, and it'll take time. But for somebody who wants to enter into the butchery profession, right now, especially in our country, it's as you well know, it's a real challenge to find that knowledge, and find a place that will teach you, especially in the way that people, I think, are yearning to learn these days, which isn't just counter cutting. It's really people want to understand how to really butcher, and not just how to, open boxes and cut portions and that stuff is important information. Case design, filling cases, customer interaction, understanding portioning, understanding all that stuff is important. But what the meat cutter behind the counter at most supermarkets has become is not what people want to become when they approach me or approach you and say, how do I become a butcher?
I tend to agree. People really want to learn slaughter and whole carcass cutting in particular, but don't know how to access that education. I know Travis at American Butcher frequently gets messages from people looking for ways to learn.
A lot of people, try to go to Italy and learn under Dario and spend 3 months there. It's like one of the places that people feel like they need to visit if they're going to become a butcher. And he's been gracious enough to allow that opportunity to happen for so many people. We need more people like that, and we need longer periods of time than 3 months, and for people really to learn under that. Hendrik Hasse, which is this German man who wrote this book called Crafted Meat, which was sort of the impetus for the creation of the Butcher's Manifesto by this guy, Michael, in Copenhagen, who runs Focus Madhus. And, Hendrik found in these archives in Berlin this booklet of this young butcher around the turn of the 19th to 20th century. And it was his passport as a journeyman butcher, and it was various pages of the butcher shops that he spent time in, and it was signed, and it showed the amount of time that he spent in these various different butcher shops, and it chronicled his education and his career in this way. And it was such a brilliant idea to have this sort of like butchery passport. What if we like had those things? And we were sort of like, look at how many stamps have you gotten? How many, have you been to these places in Spain yet and learned about the Dehasa and the Pata Negra? Like, that's a stamp that you need. You need to go to, Southeast Asia and learn about these. It's like, those are incredible opportunities that people, if they knew about them, I think could get behind for seeing their own career within this, And I don't think it has to be a career that also takes you necessarily around the world, I mean, those same sort of regional opportunities and things just occur in our own country. I mean, how people break pigs in various different state by state can be very different based upon the cuisine and the history, and it doesn't all have to be based upon speed and a bandsaw and boxes. My comments about counter cutters wasn't something that was, meant to be disrespectful. I think a lot of the time, if those people had opportunities to learn more, they would take it. That just happens to be what those sort of stores need based upon the types of meat that they rely on.
The grocery store meat cutter niche is the area within our industry with the highest pay, the most abundance of job opportunities, and best access to benefits. Because of these facts, it makes a lot of sense to pursue grocery store careers. Making an inroad with a major grocery chain gives a certain amount of job security that smaller businesses are hard-pressed to provide. I was on a management track with Whole Foods years ago, and my decision to step away from that path and plunge into the low-pay, high chance of injury world of slaughter and production custom cutting was a very, very difficult decision for me. Especially as a father and a husband, it can be tricky to leave the conventional path, to take a pay cut, and dive into a more unknown and uncertain side of this industry. With all this taken into consideration, many grocery store butchers stay in their jobs, but still harbor a want to learn more and are looking for ways to broaden their skill sets.
And there'll always be that sort of position, I'm sure. But what we also need to be able to do is recognize that a lot of people want to find value in providing work within a career that touches on a lot of other areas of the meat industry. And like you said, once you get into them, I mean, you realize just how incredibly vast they really are. I mean, it's endless. People can find out more about it online, butchersmanifesto.com.
This last section of the interview, we talk about Adam's books. I tell him the story of finding myself hired on as lead butcher for a craft butchery whole animal shop with no mentor, and how I used his books as a roadmap as I figured out how to put together a meat case. I also tell him that years later, while working in a rural cut and wrap facility, his books helped me to teach my coworkers about the more modern cuts that they did not know about. I needed to be very delicate and tactful in the way I went about this because my coworkers had been cutting meat for decades longer than me, and I didn't want to put them on the defensive. But the fact was that these modern craft butchery cuts kept showing up on our cut sheets, and I was the only one who knew how to create them. When I brought in Adam's books, they served as a very useful way to not only normalize these cuts for my coworkers, but also to educate them respectfully. The books are well organized, well laid out, and loaded with content that professionals and hobbyists from every corner of this industry would be interested in.
Yeah, well, it's humbling to hear that kind of responsiveness to a project that I had no idea whether or not it was going to provide any useful information for people. When I worked on the books themselves, originally it was just going to be one book, but I wrote too long of a book, so we had to turn it into two books. But I pretty much wrote them in secrecy because I was too ashamed to be writing a book, considering that I felt so vastly underqualified and that I didn't have the credentials to actually be in the position to be writing a book about butchery, that when they came out, I think they were a surprise to most of what would be my, I guess, colleagues now or my peers. And I was always very concerned about how they would be received by those people I respected in this industry. And I've been consistently and genuinely wholeheartedly relieved when anybody gives me any kind of complimentary message around the books, because they involved a lot of emotional turmoil and personal growth in order to bring them to fruition. And whenever you go through a process that shapes you so much as it was to produce those, I think it's nice to know that it wasn't for naught. And there have been some really amazing people who have given me really amazing feedback on how they've helped them achieve certain goals that they needed or were able to access information in them that they felt like was never readily available before that. And so it's certainly made it all worth it and then some. And I hope that they, continue to provide good information for people who are looking for inroads into learning really the underlying why of what we do and how to utilize those books as really a starting point for people developing their own personal style of butchery that fits the end results that work for them and their family or their business or anything like that. So it's meant to be a dynamic approach to butchery and not really the be all and end all reference. It's really meant to empower people to figure out how to do it themselves. There's so many sides to this craft, and there's so many approaches, and there's culturally and regionally relevant ones, and there's seasonally relevant ones, and there's no wrong way to do it. I think everyone has their own personal style of how they do it, and really those books are just meant to provide people with a foundational understanding of why meat is the way it is and how anatomy works, and then from there, experience is the only thing that's going to help them sort of shape their style.
Empowering people to figure out how to do it for themselves. Experience is everything. Gain as much of an intellectual base as you possibly can. Adam has made it his agenda, his life work, to connect butchers from all regions and every corner of the globe and make this meat world better. He's a writer, he's a teacher, travels the globe from region to region, attempting to foster a more open dialogue among butchers and meat industry professionals. There's too much division, too much disparaging of others, and too much tension. People have big egos, strong opinions about the proper way to be a butcher or the most respect-worthy type of butcher. One camp looks down their nose at another camp. Tradesmen butchers may think less of chef butchers. Craft butchers or hand-tool butchers think less of bandsaw butchers and well-saw butchers. Whole animal butchery may think less of those who work with boxed meat. And then there's slaughtery. Slaughtery is looked down upon, and it's very easy to pass moral judgment upon those who work as slaughtermen and processors. Adam Danforth is an individual who knows very well how compartmentalized, how divided the world of butchery can be. Yet he's the opposite of this. He's super positive and respectful. He believes the industry can shift toward unity, towards collaboration, and towards wholesomeness.
I've always been crazy in the trouble that it's put me through.
All right, meatheads, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Meat Block Podcast. I just want to extend a big thank you to Adam Danforth. I know that there were scheduling issues and technical issues with this interview, and Ryan and Adam both did an amazing job. And if you haven't already, I encourage you, please read his books. You could find them at adamdanforth.com, and that link will be in the show notes. You could also find them on a small website, I believe, called Amazon. And if you want to follow him on social media, you can follow Adam_Danforth on Instagram. And that is the same on Twitter. And if you have further questions for Adam, you can contact him on those platforms, and I'm sure we'll have him back on the show in the future. One thing I have learned by doing this podcast is how small and incestual our industry is. So eventually, he'll be back. And if you're looking to contact us here at the Meat Block Podcast, you could do so. themeatblockpodcast@gmail.com, tweet us at themeatblockpod, or Instagram, themeatblock. We also have a Facebook group with a lot of great conversation happening over there. And if you want to get a hold of us individually, you can contact Ryan at Gather and Break on Instagram. Even though David wasn't in this episode, you could contact him at A Farm Butcher on Instagram. You could contact myself at theamericanbutcher on Instagram and Facebook. Just look for a picture of me standing on a gate, not a picture of a dumb steak. And if you're looking for a way to support the show, the best way to do that is type in The Meat Block on your podcast search device. Use their rating system, let's say Apple Podcast app, leave 5 stars, and please leave a comment. That will make you the cat's pajamas. Just like JMac112, TGT Rapper, or maybe that's TG Trapper, and BCB18. Thanks for the awesome comments on the Apple Podcast app. Also tag us on social media, just like Waterfowl Butcher, Rocky Red 86, Mostly Wild and Free, Nick DeLauri, so N, his handle is at NDELAURI, from Vermont, We're Wolf Mode, Let's Eat 01, Goss Farms, and a big thanks to Simon Butch for the amazing logo of the margin. I also want to thank Simon for bringing up the idea and the possibility of crowdfunding us to go to the WBC in Ireland in March. After looking at our numbers and how much it would cost for us to go out there, I feel it would be way too big of an ask to help us go. And want the only thing for you guys to do right now for us is just review us. The Meat Block will have a representative there with a digital recorder behind the scenes and interviewing people. More about that in the weeks to come. Intro was Ring the Bell. Our outro is Waylon Jennings. And remember, keep your knife sharp and live in the margin.